Okay, guys, we're here for episode 3, and we're delighted to be welcomed by Damian Hughes. Big welcome to you, Damian.
Thanks for having me, lads. I'm really grateful to be asked, so looking forward to chatting a bit.
Yeah, no problem. Obviously, I know you from being a podcast host, so now the shoe's on the other foot. You're on the guest now. So, have you done many podcasts as a guest, Damian? Or?
Not many, no. Like you say, I'm more on the other side of with the high performance podcast. I'm lucky. I do it with Jake Humphrey, my mate, and I feel like I know what I don't know. So I really admire you because I feel like I've been learning. Well, I mean, Jake's an experienced broadcaster, so I feel like I've been sort of hanging on, trying to work out how it works myself. So, no, I admire you for what you're doing.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat. We haven't got any experience on this side of thing here. I think we're just,
Well, I'll tell you a story. I mean, first time I did it with Jake. So we'd been talking about this idea doing a podcast, and said I'd love to do it. And the first time we did it, we went down to Portsmouth to interview Ben Ainsley. You know, the sailor or something.
Yeah.
And we sat there, and have you ever had that experience? You know, standing at a train station, and a train that's not stopping at the station comes flying through dead fast, and like the platform shakes, doesn't it? And it sucks all the air out. Yeah. I remember being sat there, and Jake was like, "You ready? We're going to record in a minute." And I'm like, "Yeah, fine." I'm feeling a bit nervous, and press record, and it felt like that experience of a train whizzing through because he was just so good. He sort of switched on, and his energy was brilliant, and he was like note perfect, and he was really polished. And I remember sat there thinking, I've got to try and jump on that train. I'm not having a clue how to get on it. So sort of like jumping on and like closing my eyes and hoping for the best. So I appreciate like when it's done well, I realise how far away I am from doing it well.
Well, just because I do listen to the podcast as well, Damian. So
thank you.
Someone from an outside perspective, you've become a really good host as well, mate. So just
well, that's very kind. Thank you. I am grateful.
Yeah, it's mad because I always you just seem to like pluck these like nuggets of wisdom out of your own mind and just throw it in, and I just think, you know what, Damian, yeah, spot on there, pal. I always agree. I always agree with you, and you've just got like a kind of an endless knowledge of wisdom coming out of that brain of yours. So.
Well, thank you. My mum would say I've got a big empty head, so there's a lot of space to fill.
Brilliant, pal. Just before we learn a bit about your personal story, Damian, just like tell people how it came about us getting you on here, because it's quite interesting. Like I said, I was just listening to one of your podcast episodes actually. I think it was the Stephen Gerrard interview.
Yeah.
And I just connected with you on LinkedIn, and literally I was looking at my phone and get a notification, and it's like, Damian Hughes has sent you a message. And I'm like, bloody hell. I'm listening to you in my earphones, and I get a message.
Cool.
Get a message through, and you introduce yourself, and it's just like, if I can help you in any way. And that's when we obviously, tried to get you on for as a guest. And I just thought, that such a humble approach from yourself, I just thought were credit to you, really.
Oh, well, thanks, mate. I mean, LinkedIn's an interesting one. I don't think I feel like I fully understand it. Do you know what I mean? Because I get people that'll send you a message, and I think I don't know them. Do you know what I mean? Like somebody will send you a message, and I don't know them, but they don't say, "Oh, this is why I've linked in with you," or "This is." So, like, if I get time, I always just say, "Hi, nice to meet you. My name's Damian," because I'm not sure why you've linked in, and if I can help you, let me know. So I'm not sure if that's the rules of how you're supposed to engage on there, but I always think.
Yeah, I'm lost a bit as well, to be honest. I signed up and I went, I don't understand this. And
I don't. But I mean, I'm getting to an age in my life where there's an awful lot I don't understand, and I think, I don't understand social media these days. I don't get it. I don't understand.
Yeah.
So many different things that I think just be yourself and be polite and respectful, and like that, if I can send you a message and say nice to meet you, thanks for linking up.
Yeah, Well, don't change that approach, mate. On from my behalf, I think that's a great way just to connect with people and yeah, so that's good.
Cheers, thank you.
Yeah, so obviously we're very interested in, the reason why we're doing this sort of podcast is to get stories from people like yourself, and any knowledge you can portray to our listeners would be just brilliant.
Well, why is that? So just for my interest,
Yeah.
like because I appreciate it takes time, it takes effort, that you guys are giving up your time freely to do it. What's your driver to want to do this?
I think personally, from over the last three years or so, we've really gone on that journey of self-development and just learning from other people's stories and just picking knowledge from them. So yeah, just sorry, mate, we've just got a delivery driver knocking on the door here. We can edit this out. Sorry. It's Craig's coffee shop. We're sat in his coffee shop.
Oh right, whereabouts is it?
In centre of Halifax.
Oh right, okay, you're in the middle of town.
Yeah, if you're ever passing by, mate, call in for a coffee.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah, I'd come for a brew.
Typical, that, isn't it?
I told you to come on.
Right, we can edit that part out.
It's quite nice.
Right, so we'll start off. So yeah, so we've been on like a personal journey over the last few years of really learning about self-development and listening to other people's inspirational stories who have been successful. And I think I've heard you say it before. We say it: success leaves clues. So one thing that I've personally learned is I love helping people, and this is kind of our way of helping people learn, from people like yourself.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So, I don't know about you, Bill.
No, pretty much the same thing. I had about three years ago now. I had a bad injury on my knee, and it took about 9 months to get back into just doing anything, not just football. And I took that time to just rethink things and come out of it with a positive mindset on everything. So, and then obviously I've opened a business in like the worst year ever. So yeah, it's been fun. To try and help people is always a nice little thing to end the year on, I think.
Yeah, good on you. I really admire you both.
Yeah. Why did you and Jake start it then?
So, me and Jake met in Norwich a few years ago, and he's from Norwich. And I was doing some work with the football club down there with Norwich City, and Jake's one of the patrons. So we got chatting over dinner when we were there, and we got talking about our own experiences. So Jake had sort of started life. He's got a really fascinating backstory himself. He comes from Norwich. He was badly bullied as a kid at school. Struggled with his exams, and then found he got a break in sort of television, and he sort of made a very successful career for himself. Started on children's television, got onto Formula One. He's now fronting up BT Sports football coverage. He's got his own TV production company. And I think one of the things that he's understood is that he always felt as an outsider in many ways. There was a secret to being a high performer. And he talks about he would be like around the pit lanes in Formula One, and he'd be saying to the drivers or these billionaire owners, like, well, what is it? What's the secret? And increasingly the answer was, well, there isn't one. Now, from my background, I come from a boxing family. So my dad was a boxing coach in North Manchester. And so long before I can remember, my dad had set up the boxing club. And he had guys that he was training blokes going on to become going to the Olympic Games as amateurs and being successful there, or going to become world boxing champions. So I was around sort of high performance at a really young age, and I could see the hard work, the discipline, the sacrifice, the dedication that went into it. But I also saw how powerful culture was, because like most boxing clubs, they're not always set in the most sort of salubrious or wealthy areas, and that was the case for us. But you saw how it wasn't about having facilities or having the best of things. It was about having a really powerful culture. So I felt I'd been around that, and I'd pursued that in my own career, both in academia and working with lots of teams. And we both sort of come to the understanding was there is no secret, but there are patterns that you can pick up on.
Yeah.
So we had this idea of, well, how do we help people? How do we share that? And there's almost a purity to how do we share that with people, that they can hear these insights, that there is no secret, but here's some methods or techniques. And then our driver was to do that for free, to give it away. So I'm always conscious when I talk about the podcast and people go, oh, what are you selling? You go, not selling anything, we're giving it away for free. You can access it on YouTube, or you can download it anywhere. And that's been a big driver for us, that people can get this stuff and feel that high performance isn't about being a world champion. It's not being about a multimillionaire. It's about, my definition is, it's about using the resources you've got in the moment you're in to do the best that you can.
Yeah.
So, like, to use a daft example, if you put me up against Usain Bolt running 100 meters, Usain Bolt wins every time, 10 out of 10, he'll beat me. But do I believe that I could learn to be a better sprinter over 100 meters? Yeah, I'm never going to beat Usain Bolt because our base level of talent is so different. But I believe that I can become a high performer given my own starting position, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not about trying to tell people that we can all be world champions, but that's not the message. It's about we can all use the resources we've got to do the best we can in the moment we're in.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, well, just hearing your reason why you started, I think we might have to rethink ours a bit. Come up with a bit of a better story. But
I don't think you do. I think it's powerful in its own way. I think I know you're joking to a degree, but I think you both don't underestimate the power of authenticity. You know, you've both been on your own journeys, you've all learned lessons, and there's a purity to the fact that you want to share your insights, and don't underestimate how powerful that is.
Yeah, I think a couple of people have actually asked us, you know, why are you doing a podcast? You know, can you make money from it? And we're just like, I don't know, mate. To be fair, that's not why we're doing it. You know, if it comes later on down the line, then that's fine. But you know, the initial reason of us doing it is, like you say, we're authentic, and we genuinely want to pass these messages on. People.
Delayed gratification is really powerful. One of our interviewees we had recently was the Oscar winner, Matthew McConaughey.
Yes.
And he was big on this idea that don't do it because you have to get an immediate reward. Do it because the reward is just doing it in its own point.
Yeah.
So he was talking about the Oscar he won for the Dallas Buyers Club, and he said he thought it was a really powerful message to give to his kids. So when he eventually won the Oscar, it was like 2 years after he'd lost all that weight to play the role of a guy that was HIV positive.
Yeah.
And he said he loved it because he could say to, when his son was like, why have you won the Oscar, Dad? He was like, well, do you remember 2 years ago when I had to deny myself food and go on this really intense diet to lose all that weight? Yeah. Well, this trophy today is a reward for what I did 2 years ago. And it's almost that idea that you don't have to do it just because the reward is immediate. You do it for the pleasure of doing it. And then that delayed gratification can sometimes taste a lot sweeter.
Yeah. That really hit home for me listening to that part of his podcast as well. Yeah, it was brilliant. He also spoke about there was a section where I think you guys asked him about setbacks, and I think he mentioned in quite an eloquent way about stepping in shit around the track. If you just tell us about that little section as well.
Yeah, so one of his famous phrases is the idea of don't leave crumbs, just do the right thing, because you leave crumbs behind, eventually you've got to come back and pick them up. So it's almost about that idea of just do the right thing, not because you're trying to put it on social media or you're trying to show off what a good bloke you are. Just do it because you're just a good bloke. that's enough in its own right. Yeah. And so, yeah, he was speaking about that in lots of different ways, but that phrase, just don't leave crumbs. So he was saying, like, if he robbed me, he said, if I met you and I robbed you and I stole your wallet, and he said, and I might live high on the hog for with your credit cards and things like that for a few days, but I'm always going to be looking over my shoulder that one day I might meet you.
Yeah.
And that's what he means about leaving crumbs. Don't shaft somebody just because you can, because you've always got to then be looking over your shoulder for what happens if he ever bumped into me or something like that. And that was his point around it.
Yeah, brilliant. They were some character. I really enjoyed that one. I think I heard you laughing quite uncontrollably a few times as well.
There's a few bits where I've drove my wife mad, because when we said it, he kept doing that high performance life, and I keep saying it to my wife. But there's so many of these blokes, a bit like yourselves, like where you buy into authenticity, don't you? People like you for just being you, and I don't think he was trying to play a part or be something. He was just going, "This is who I am. I'm just full of energy and decent bloke, and I'm a good storyteller," and that was what he was doing.
Yeah, definitely was. Yeah, right. Yeah, just focusing on obviously a bit more of your own journey, Damian.
Well,
You mentioned your obviously your childhood. Your father was a boxing coach. Then can you just tell us a bit more about your childhood and your upbringing, if that's all right?
Yeah, of course. So I'm one of four. So like I said before, I've got two brothers and a sister, and we grew up in North Manchester. And like I say, there was a powerful message there. So my mum was amazing in terms of looking after us, whereas my dad was going off, sort of pursuing his dreams. So he's got an interesting background. He came from he was an illegitimate child born in Catholic post-war Manchester. And the reason I mention that is being an illegitimate child in those days was a proper stigma. And his driver was, so he never had a dad, but he sort of fell into boxing. And boxing's one of these sports where if you've not got anyone looking out for you, you can get yourself badly hurt. And that was the case for him. So he got thrown in and overmatched and ended up sort of getting himself quite badly hurt through his career. And I think that was a big driver for him. Those two things were big drivers for him to want to set up a boxing club, because it was a real passion of his. He wanted to be the father figure that he'd never had, which he ended up doing that for a lot of kids that came in there. And I think he was determined that he would do boxing in the right way. So it was about looking after people, making sure that one of his traits of training fighters was that you could defend yourself. Boxing is the art of self-defense. And his was all about it. So fighters that came from his gym were renowned for being great defensive fighters. So he was doing that long before we ever grew up. I mean, there's a nice sort of addition to that a couple of years ago, Manchester Council named a road after him in the city in honour of the work and the impact that he'd done. And it wasn't about the boxing, it was about the impact it had on people's lives, of teaching them about decency and respect and humility and all those great characteristics. So I grew up with like a pretty significant figure like that in my life, and I was and like I say, I was exposed very early on to the kind of insights of what it took to go after your goals. If you want to be a high performer in any domain, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot of effort and dedication that goes into it. So I never had any illusion that was what the game was about. And when I say the game, I mean life in general. But boxing's a great way of teaching you some lessons. So I'll give you an example. I remember being a kid. I was about 13, 14, and I was boxing. And I ended up taking a liberty with a lad in the ring. So I was overmatched. I was better than him. And being 13, I was a bit of a dick. And I sort of threw my weight around a bit and took a liberty. And as I was getting out of the ring after we'd done sparring, my dad came in and said, "You've not done a proper workout, you stop in." And he put a young professional in the ring with me. And for the next 3 minutes, this lad boxed my head off, humiliated me, made me look the dick that I'd made somebody else look. And it was humiliating, it was embarrassing, it was humbling. And as I got out of the ring, I was sort of nearly crying with tears of frustration. And my dad came over, he said, "How do you feel?" And I couldn't speak, I was that choked up. And he went, "That's exactly how you made that lad before you failed." And he went, "Don't ever let me see you bully anyone or take a liberty again." So there was lots of lessons like that being taught all the time in like really quite powerful, visceral ways that as an adult now, you look back and you go, I hate people taking the piss or bullying somebody or taking liberties. But it comes down to how I made somebody feel and the lesson that followed on the back of it. But I was lucky that my mum and dad didn't really have an education to speak of, but they were determined that there's an old Nelson Mandela quote that education is the engine of all improvement. And so they made sure that we sort of knuckled down and behaved ourselves at school. And I was lucky, I got a scholarship to go to a school called Hughes Grammar. And I was like a fish out of water. I got there and felt like I didn't belong and I wasn't sure how to cope. And I ended up going there and sort of getting myself into a load of lumber. So I ended up sort of fighting and sort of getting into all kinds of scrapes. And they were going to kick me out. I think that sort of exhausted their goodwill because they were paying for me on a scholarship. And I think they'd seen that I was being a bit stupid. And I think I'd sort of worn out their patience levels. And I'd been in a fight with a lad one day and they were going to kick me out of the school. And I felt so, these are one of these moments when you look back in hindsight, you go, I feel really lucky. There was a teacher at the school, a man called Mr. Council, who lived not far away from where I'd grown up. And just as an aside, I was an altar boy at church on a Sunday, right? So I was behaving like this, like a bit of a tearaway. But then I'd go to Mass on Sunday and I'd serve on the altar and things like that. And this teacher had come in one day into church and he'd seen me on the altar. And I remember looking at him thinking, he can't square the circle here. He's seeing this tearaway, a lad at school that behaves like a dick, and yet he's on the altar here. And I could see he came up to me at school the next day and went, what's going on? Like, what are you doing there? So anyway, I could see he was confused by this sort of this inconsistency. And then I got into this trouble where they were going to kick me out. And this Mr. Council came up and he spoke up for me. And he said to the teachers, he said, listen, give him a second chance and I promise I'll take him under my wing. And then he came round and met my mum and dad, and they all read me the riot act and said, Mr. Council's put his neck on the line. One more indiscretion from you and you're out. There's no second chances. That was like one of those moments in your life where you went, I need to knuckle down here and behave myself. I might not be the cleverest, but I'm going to work hard. And that sort of like was a big driver for me in that way. So like even now, this Mr. Council is in his mid-80s and I'll go and see him once a year and take him out for a bite to eat because I feel like it's my way of just paying respect for somebody that, you know, he showed a belief in me before I had any belief in myself. Do you know what I mean? He thought it was better than what I thought it was, which was, I think you need to pay respect to people like that in your life, don't you?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was very much my origin story.
Yeah.
So I sort of pursued it in sort of further education in terms of trying to make sense of a lot of this stuff. And then I ended up in my mid-20s thinking that, so I was working as a coach in football and boxing.
Right.
And I was going to night school at the same time to carry on doing it, to try and combine all these interests. And then long story short, I ended up getting a corporate job. I thought I needed to get a proper job. I did a proper job and hated it. But I ended up doing 7 years sort of working in the corporate world. And there was another really significant moment for me that I got this job. I ended up sort of working in New York, and then I worked out in South Africa for this company. And I remember sat in their offices one day. I was in Durban, and we were sat in this meeting room that looked out over the Indian Ocean. And I remember sat in this room thinking, I hate this job. And I was surrounded by like really impressive, like everything looked really smart. But I remember thinking, I'd do anything to be back at home. Yeah. Like I could feel myself just dead inside. And we were having this conversation around this boardroom about margarine sales, right? Get this. I remember watching all these fellas debate, like looking devastated that margarine sales in the region had dipped. And I remember sat there thinking, I couldn't give a shit. There's not one part of me that cares. But I remember as the debate came to me about what I was going to do about it, I remember to my shame, pretending to be really upset like everyone else was. And I felt humiliated that night. I went home and I went, you know what? I've got 30 years of being a fraud here. And I thought, and I'm not prepared to trade it. So I packed in this corporate job and then set up on my own, where I thought I'll give it a go, sort of working as a consultant. And that was about 16 years ago now, where I've been lucky enough where, you know, I enjoy writing the books, I enjoy working with different sports teams, I enjoy doing the podcast, and I enjoy sort of talking about some of the lessons that I've learned along the way.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot to take in. I think just from a young age, you've had like the inspirational sort of people around you. Like you say, you had your dad there and the Mr. Council as well. So it's always good to have them type of characters in your life. I think
I think it's an important point to make, Alex. I think that in the interviews we've done on the podcast series, one of my favourite questions is asking about this golden seed moment. And it's Sigmund Freud that said that everybody has got a golden seed moment. Some stage in your life, somebody comes along, whether it's a parent, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a sports coach, and they believe in you before you believe in yourself. They encourage you and they sow that seed that hopefully blossoms into something greater. Yeah. And I think this always intrigues me. Like when I interviewed Kelly Holmes, I asked her and she went, Miss Page. I went, who was that? She went, it was my sports teacher. She said, when I was 14, she said I was a mixed race girl growing up in a white village. She said I wasn't good at school. I'd been in and out of foster care. She said I was regarded as a bit of a tearaway. And Miss Page, my sports teacher, came along and said, you're a really good runner. I think you've got some real potential there. Yeah. She said it was the first time anyone had ever told me I was good at something. And the impact of that moment has lasted all her life. That she said, why am I good at it? And she went, you're disciplined, you're dedicated, you try your best. And she said she was working in a sweet shop at the time, and because somebody had told her that she was disciplined, she'd never heard that term applied to her. She decided to test the discipline and said she wasn't going to eat a sweet. Go see how long she could go without eating the sweets that she was surrounded by in the shop she was working in. She said I went for a year without touching a sweet, just because somebody had said to me, I think you're really disciplined, and that discipline means that you're going to be a good runner. Yeah. So I don't think I'm unique in that way. I think everybody is. I'm sure you guys can remember somebody significant in your life at that age that went, I think you're a good footballer, or I think you're a good lad, or, you got the potential to run a coffee shop, like run a business or something like that. Might not have been as explicit as that, but somebody that believed in you before you did it for yourself. Everybody needs it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it just kind of, you've got to kind of think about when you're speaking to young people as well. It's like you could be that person that could set something off for that young person as well, I think. Just kind of makes you think in that way, doesn't it?
At any moment, do you know what I mean? Like, I read a quote this weekend that I thought was lovely that said, like, never let anyone come into your company and leave not feeling better about themselves. It doesn't take a lot, does it, just to pay somebody a call, how are you? You're looking well, or, really like the way you ask that question. Like, I think this is one of the things that I see when I work with, a lot of my work is about creating high-performing cultures, and I often think about language is really significant. That how often do you hear people talk about banter? Yeah. And they excuse what's quite toxic behaviour as banter. So they're taking the piss out of somebody and making them feel shit about themselves. And then when they get called out, it's just banter, just having a joke. And you go, well, that guy's coming away thinking you're a dick for what you've just said about them. Yeah. And it's difficult to come back at you because then nobody wants to be accused of lacking a sense of humour. But what have you achieved by that? You've left somebody leaving your organisation feeling worse about themselves. Why would you want to do it? Whether that's with an adult or whether it's young people, it just seems that it doesn't add much value to me.
Yeah, I think if you say one word to someone that makes them feel down, then I think you can disregard it as banter, because end of the day, banter is meant to be humorous and funny. But if you're dragging someone down, it's
that's a distinction, isn't it? But then that's my distinction. If it's humour is inclusive. We're all in on the joke. Yeah. Banter relies on excluding someone from the joke. So there's the difference right away. So humour is we're all in it together. Banter is no, I'm in a position of superiority and I'm taking the piss out of you for something.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I just picked up a moment there when you were talking about, you worked in the corporate job and you were sat there, talking about margarine or whatever. I've read a book recently, Dave. I don't know if you've read it, called Lost Connections.
No, go on.
Yeah, it's all about like the main causes of like depression and anxiety.
Oh yeah, go
on. And one of the main causes is actually, not feeling fulfilled in your place of work.
Right.
And I kind of pinpointed that moment on your career there. So I mean,
possibly.
I
think the context behind that was that. I'll tell you what. So I agree that idea of not feeling fulfilled. I think I misjudged the rules of the game. So I went in the corporate world and didn't know what I was doing. And my mum had said to me when I first got the job, she said, "What are you going to do when you get found out?" And now only a mum can ever ask you that question. But I remember thinking, I went into it thinking, well, I'll work hard and I'll try my best and I'll see how far I get. And every year my boss would phone me up and he'd say, can you come in tomorrow? And I used to go in. And this sounds daft to anyone that understands the corporate world, because I didn't understand it. I used to think I was going to get sacked the next day. I always thought that was my moment I'd been found out. So I used to go in thinking, right, I'll get my cards and I'll go and leave with a bit of dignity. And for 7 years, they kept promoting me. So I go into these meetings and they say, I've got another opportunity for you. I want you to go. Like, I lived in New York for 6 months. I went and lived out in South Africa. So they were giving me these amazing opportunities. But then the Peter principle says eventually you get promoted to your level of incompetence, right? And I love sort of getting out there and creating cultures and getting my hands dirty. And I found myself in a job where I was basically sat in meetings day after day. But what had happened was that up until this moment where I'd been promoted to my level of incompetence, I thought it was really important what I was doing, and I got carried away with it. And I ended up sort of like, one of my big flaws is that if I'm in, I'm all in. Do you know what I mean? If I come with you, you're going to get everything.
Yeah.
And I sort of did this big turnaround piece on this job I was working on. And for about 18 months, I flogged myself. Ended up getting really ill and contracting meningitis, right? I just basically worked myself to a frazzle. My immune system got depleted. And meningitis, I was just unlucky with that was the illness I got. And my girlfriend at the time, she's my wife now, she phoned up my bosses to say, he's seriously ill in hospital. The first question my boss asked was, she said, is it contagious? Do we have to shut the place down? And when she was reassured that I didn't, she went, all right, thanks, and put the phone down. And it took her 2 days to phone to find out if I was still alive.
Oh.
And when I found out a bit later, I didn't get told this at the time, but when I recovered, I often say that was the moment where I mentally resigned. I just followed through 18 months later. So from that day on, at first I was a bit like really bitter about it. And then when I reflected, I thought, don't be bitter. I've misunderstood the rules of the game, not them. I thought what I was doing was really significant. To them, I was just a number. As long as I was hitting my targets, they were happy. Yeah. And I remember thinking, if I'd have died that day with meningitis, I reckon at best they might have spent a couple of hours in the morning mourning me. By the afternoon, they'd have started working out who was going to take over.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, and that isn't a criticism of them. That's the rules of the game that they're playing. I misunderstood it, not them.
Yeah.
And that was when I thought, I'm not sure I want to be in a place where I'm just a number. I want to do something where I can make a positive difference that matters. And that was why I thought if I set up my own consultancy, you get more control over making sure you're in those environments where that's the case.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So talking about, so you've left this job and you're going to your own consultancy. Like, I mean, I'm looking at a list here of people you've interviewed, and then you look at the clubs you've worked with.
Yeah.
What were the starting point? Like, what was, because it's not all just straight away. I mean, at Man United, bang, Sir Alex has got me. What was the the starting point?
Bit like, it's a good question. I think it's that what goes back to what we spoke about earlier. It's delayed gratification. Go and give your time to places where where there's no budget, there's no money, but you can go and learn your craft in many ways, make mistakes, get put on your ass, and then eventually you learn how to sort of be able to make an impact better. So if you're smart about it, you can go back and revise it and do it. So I had a mate of mine, he's been in the news a lot recently, Kevin Sinfield.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the rugby league lad. So I knew Kevin anyway. And Kevin had sort of said to me, I'd like you to, he'd introduced me to his coach at the time at Leeds Rhinos, a guy called Tony Smith. And through Kevin, we'd sort of met, and me and Tony got on really well. And I just used to go meet him for a pint once a month. We just used to sit, and it was just as friends. We just used to sit in a pub and chat. And this was while I was still working in the corporate world. And he'd sort of throw ideas at me, I'd throw ideas at him, and we'd just bounce it around and chat. And then when I left, Tony had said to me, do you fancy coming and helping out? But they had no budget. So I was going to Leeds Rhinos, and then Tony got the England rugby league job. So I went in and supported him there. So, but for 18 months prior to that, I was just meeting him as a friend. So we had that sort of relationship of trust, and we liked each other. So it was stuff like that, really. It was about never doing it because I thought I was going to get paid for doing it. Yeah. It was about doing it because, like, I wrote my first book when I was still in the corporate world. And I never wrote the book to be published. I wrote it because I wanted to give it as a gift to one of the jobs I was doing. Was I was running 3 factories just outside of Liverpool where we're trying to create a high-performing culture. I wrote a book for the blokes in the factory and self-published it. I paid for it myself and gave it to them. And it got quite a lot of interest in the sort of trade press afterwards. So people, and then I got approached by a publisher to buy the book off me. But I never wrote the book because I thought I was going to write a book to put it on sale. I wrote it because I just loved the topic and was interested in exploring it. So I think it's an important point that I never did it to get paid for it. I never did it because I thought I wanted to get to a certain position. I did it just because I loved doing it. Yeah. And then I was lucky enough on the way that people are kind enough to say, oh, I really enjoyed that, or, you know, can you come and help us? But that, you're right, that was never the starting position.
Would you say, because if you look at like high performance level teams, so for instance, use Man United, would you say you were like one of the first to be doing that at the time? So like you went in at Leeds Rhinos and obviously the England rugby team. Like,
yeah, so I'm not a sports psychologist, so that's the important thing to make. So my background is in organisational psychology. So I think that's still rare because I think it's about understanding cultures rather than just specifically working with players that might have, say, confidence issues or things like that, some of the more traditional areas of sports psychology. So the answer is I don't know. I think sports psychology is a lot more prolific within sort of elite environments now. But I think my role is more looking at the culture and the environment and creating it. I think sports psychology is really valuable on an individual basis. I think organisational psychology is better for sort of team environments and things like that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So yeah, obviously, let's have a bit of a chat about getting hired by Sir Alex Ferguson. That must have been a big moment for you. Can you just tell us about the process of that and how that came about?
Well, I mean, I never. So just to clarify it, that I never worked there in the capacity of organisational psychologist for Alex Ferguson. I got to meet him a few times when I was researching some of the books. So, I wasn't employed by him to do the nature of this. It was more around when I was researching some of the topics. He was very kind and generous to sort of meet and share some of his insights. But my insight of him is he was a guy that sort of understood a lot of this intuitively. And I think a lot of that, you know, he'd had such a long career. He'd learned so many of these principles that he was applying anyway. And my job was to try and make sense of some of the principles that he was doing. So I did write a book about him called How to Think Like Alex Ferguson, where I went and interviewed a wide range of people that had worked for him and I was then trying to understand the principles he'd done and put the theory behind it. So that was more my interaction with him.
Yeah. So what would you say are some of the main sort of lessons you learned from your time with Sir Alex?
I mean, there were so many of them, but I think there's a couple that are really valuable for people that often get overlooked. One, I think he managed upwards really well. So he kept people that were in the decision-making process completely updated with what he was working on and things like that. And I think that bought him time. I think the second thing was he thought long-term. He had a phrase that we play for today, but we plan for tomorrow. And it was always that idea that he was making long-term decisions as well as short-term. So, for example, when he gets rid of the likes of Beckham, Van Nistelrooy, Stam, it was because he always felt he had somebody that in 4 years' time was in a position to replace him, so you need to give them the opportunity. Now, that's different from a lot of managers because they often thinking, what do I need to do for today? So there's not always that long term. And then the third thing is he surrounded himself with people that plugged the gaps that he couldn't do. So you think about in his 26 years, he had 9 different assistant coaches at United. If you think of his next nearest equivalent, Arsene Wenger had one, and Pat Rice in his first 20 years. Now, that's not criticism of Pat Rice, but I think what that tells you about Ferguson was he was bringing in Brian Kidd to work with young coaches. He brought in Steve McLaren, that was seen as the best innovative coach in Britain at the time. Then he brought in Carlos Queiroz, that had a European pedigree that he didn't have. So I think he was constantly surrounding himself with people that challenged him. So he wasn't arrogant enough to think he had all the answers, but he was happy to surround himself with people that did.
Yeah, brilliant. So another one of the books that you have written, Damian, it's called the five steps to a
winning mindset.
Winning mindset. Sorry, yeah. Can you just explain a bit about that one? Because I've read that one myself, and it were a fantastic read, mate. I'll tell you that.
Thanks, mate. So the idea behind that was that I wanted to go around and I got lucky and spent 3 years traveling the world interviewing elite sports coaches, just looking at what did they do that made them so successful. And what I found was this idea of steps is that I found it wasn't the sport, it was how they did it that was most interesting. And I thought there was 5 things that were consistently there. So when I wrote the book, I wanted it to be like a bit of a shopping list in people's head. So when you're working with a team, whether it's a classroom full of kids, whether it's people coming in your coffee shop, whether it's working in sport, if you're not getting the results you want, the question is, what do I need to do? And the steps is the acronym. So there's 5 things that I saw happening. The first one was they kept things really simple. The second thing was they didn't give you the answers, they made you think for yourself. The third one was they were emotionally intelligent. And what I mean by that is they don't underestimate the power of kindness, decency, understanding. The fourth one was they kept their language really practical. So they didn't use jargon or use in-house terminology. They made the language really accessible. And then the fifth one was they were brilliant storytellers. And they were the consistent traits that all these coaches had. And so the idea behind the book was to share some of these insights and say, look, this is where it's done here, or this is done here. Because there's an important distinction that, although I went looking in sport, one of the things I was keen to emphasise is it wasn't about sport, it was about people who just occasionally worked in that industry.
Yeah. I think with all like this, the stuff you've written about, it's kind of, it's not like say it's directed at sport slightly, but it goes in a much bigger scale, doesn't it? You can use it across anything in life. Yeah, thank you. But I think that's the point to make, that it's about that I don't just work in sport, I work with people, but they might work in different industries. So we interviewed recently Kelly Jones from the Stereophonics on a podcast. So he's not a sports person, he's a person that just works in the music industry. Do you know what I mean? But the insights that he's had about coming from this small town in South Wales to becoming one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Well, there's plenty of things you can learn there about dedication, hard work, learning, surrounding yourself with good people. That's equally applicable to
talking to Matthew McConaughey that's done the same principles in Hollywood that then is equally applicable to, in a couple of weeks, we've got a guy called Sia Colosi coming on that was the Springboks captain last year winning the Rugby World Cup.
Wow.
There's a pattern to how a lot of these people do, regardless of the industry they're in.
Yeah. Brilliant, man.
Yeah.
You know that?
Yeah, it's I don't. So Alex talks a lot about reading your books and stuff like that, and I'm not a reader. I just can't. Can't sit still for so long. Like I've always got to be doing something. Like so, you know, if I can listen to it, then I'll listen to it. I think I've drank too much coffee. I think that's what it is. I am just always on the move. Like I can't sit still. But I wanna go back to education now. I've got 2 young children, and you've already spoke about your children. Is there anything that you think that we could do education-wise that we have in our system now? You'd go, right, I think we could change that, or because I think a lot of kids these days are being bullied, and it's not just, you know, in school, it's online as well. And I just think the mindset towards school sometimes can be a bit like, I don't want to go. I've got an upset stomach. I don't want to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you think we can change or help with? Anything?
There's a lovely question that I'd encourage you to maybe think about, and it had a big impact on me when I first came across it. There's a guy called Howard Gardner, an educational psychologist, that has a great line. He says, don't ask your kids how clever are you. Instead, start asking them, how are you clever? Because his point is all kids are clever. We're just clever in different ways. Some kids are physically gifted, some are verbally gifted, some are musically gifted, some are socially gifted. But if we only ever assume that intelligence is about how good they are at maths or at English, how many kids leave school thinking they're fake? When the reality is they were clever, just not necessarily in that way. And I think just getting kids to recognise a bit that golden seed. What are you gifted at? What makes you special? What makes you a unique person?
Yeah,
is really powerful. And then I think I'm no expert on this. I've got 2 children myself, but I'm clear about non-negotiable behaviours. We've got 3 that we talk about being kind, caring, and sharing.
Yeah.
So when they might come and tell us something, you go, "Is that kind?" You know, yeah, okay, good. Is it caring? Yeah. Are you sharing that? Yeah. Well, if it is, do it. But if it contravenes that, maybe take a moment to think about whether you want to do it or not.
Yeah.
I think the stuff around, social media frightens me for the kids because I'm in the generation where I don't understand it. I said at the start, I don't get a lot of this stuff, but I felt like I had to be on social media for the nature of the work I do, and I've changed that stance over the last 12 months where I've chose to remove myself from a lot of it. Right. Partly because my son turned 11 and we'd promised him when he started at big school he could get a phone. And it's like the old saying, if you want your kids to learn to love reading, they've got to see you read. If you want your kids to love exercise, they've got to see you doing it.
Yeah.
I thought, I can't be on social media and tell my son I don't want him on it when he gets a phone. So I thought I've got to role model these behaviours and come off it and say to me, you don't need this shit. It's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for adults, but even less so for an 11-year-old boy trying to access some of this stuff. You know, and again, but then not just doing it because it's a gimmick. They say to him, is it kind, caring and sharing? Well, a lot of it isn't. No. So why would you do it? And then again, it's a hard one with kids, but trying to get them to see that deferred gratification, but also the deferred consequences. Some of the stuff you're posting now might come back and bite you on the arse in. Do you know what I mean? If you say something nasty about somebody, that you make a comment that amongst you and your mates might be considered humorous, put it in black and white, that humour doesn't always translate. You can be labelled as a homophobe or a sexist or a racist, you know, or any other kind of ism by failing to appreciate this.
Yeah. So just going a bit back to the podcast, Damian. So you've obviously spoke to some pretty amazing people. What would you say has been probably your favourite interview so far, and maybe what kind of lessons can you pass on to us from that person?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one because I've enjoyed all of them. I might not always have liked them, but I've enjoyed them. So there's a distinction there. But I think anyone that's giving the time up to chat with you, you should be prepared to learn from.
We won't ask you to name that person, by them people, by the
way. I'll give you 3 for different reasons, though. The one that I felt really delighted about was we interviewed Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and I've been lucky enough. I've known Ole for quite a while, and I called in a favour with him to ask him to come and chat, and he was good enough to do it. So there was a bit there when we interviewed him that I felt really quite moved that the manager of Manchester United had agreed to help me out. So from a very personal point of view, that was really phenomenal. Matthew McConaughey, because how often do you get to speak to an Oscar-winning actor? So just for like the star power alone, I found it exciting.
Yeah.
And then Johnny Wilkinson was a really powerful one because I think he came in and really challenged a lot of preconceptions about, he described surviving his career, enduring it as opposed to enjoying it. And I think that really challenged a lot of perceptions. So I'd say those 3 for very different reasons, but they all they stand out in my head.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. Yeah, that Johnny Wilkinson one, I listened to that myself, and I was just like, when it finished, I was like, whoa. It goes deep. It goes deep.
Yeah, that was our reaction, but I think it took real. I remember sat there at the time thinking, I really admire your courage to do this.
Yeah.
Because when we finished the interview, he said to us, please don't edit this to make me look a dick. But he trusted us enough to share it before making that request. Yeah. I remember thinking, he didn't want to talk about his career in detail. He wanted to know what the lessons he'd learned from it. And I remember sat there thinking, I really admire you that you're trying to shift the conversation around mental health. Yeah. And, I don't underestimate that. That takes balls to do what he did.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Will you be able to edit this out? But I'm going to have to shoot off in a minute if that's
okay. Yeah, of course, mate. Yeah. Sure. No, that's fine. We'll wrap it up there, pal. Just to finish on then, mate. Just if you had the power to invite anyone into this interview with us right now, who would you choose and why?
Eric Cantona.
Eric Cantona, right?
Yeah. Get him in.
Why would you choose him?
Phenomenal. So I'm the generation that grew up when Cantona arrived. So I love this swagger and I love what he did in terms of I'm a United fan. So seeing him win the league with him at the helm was great. But more importantly than that, I think it's the collateral impact he had that I think he shaped the 10, 15 years that followed after he'd retired. I think he was a cultural architect in the most powerful way possible. And he did it on his terms. You know what I mean? Walking out at 30 years of age, leaving wanting more. He was a genius in so many ways.
Yeah, that would be a good one. Yeah, fair play. Right, mate, well, thank you for your time. It's been amazing to chat with you, Damian. Thanks for your time.
No, it's been a pleasure. I've loved it. Thank you for having me along.
Yeah, and keep doing what you're doing with the podcast and everything else, mate. And keep in touch.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Right. Have a good Christmas and New Year, boys.
Look after yourself. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, lads. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another inspiring self-made story, and we hope you enjoyed the show. We would be very grateful if you could kindly leave us a review, as it will help us impact a wider audience. You can do this on iTunes, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you want to reach out on the socials, find us across all platforms using @the Self Made Minds Podcast. See you next time, and happy success making.